Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains had to offer. I was wrong. It was March 1984 when it started. The worst time of year to be walking these trails, really. The snow was melting, turning everything into thick, sticky mud that grabbed at your boots with every step. Most visitors stayed away during mud season, which meant I spent a lot of time alone out there. I didn't mind the quiet. Growing up Cherokee, my grandmother used to say the mountains talk to those who knew how to listen. She told me stories about the old spirits that lived in these hills, but I never put much stock in them. I had a master's degree in Appalachian history and training in archaeology. I believed in facts, not fairy tales. The Bone Woman was one of those old stories. Grandmothers would tell it to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods alone. They said she was a tall woman in white who collected the bones of children who died sad and alone. She'd arrange them in pretty patterns and tend to them like a garden. Pure nonsense, I always thought. Just a way to explain why so many children died young in the old days before modern medicine. But that morning, when old Pete Hartwell came stumbling out of the mist near Cumberland Gap, I started to wonder if maybe some stories had more truth in them than I wanted to believe. Pete was about 70, one of those tough mountain men who'd been hiking these trails since before I was born. His face was white as paper, and his hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his walking stick. "Ranger Thornfield," he said, his voice all raspy and strange. "You need to come see this. There's something in the woods that ain't right." I grabbed my gear, my camera, some evidence bags, and my radio, and followed him up the muddy trail. The mist was so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. Everything felt muffled and wrong, like the mountain was holding its breath. "Found it about a quarter mile up," Pete said as we walked. "Was looking for a good spot to rest when I saw the flowers." "Flowers?" I asked. It was still too cold for most things to be blooming. "You'll see," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach twist. We climbed higher, our boots making sucking sounds in the mud. The air got colder the further we went, which didn't make sense. Usually it warmed up as the day went on, even in March. But this cold felt different. It went right through my coat and settled in my bones. That's when I saw them. Wildflowers, mountain laurel and trillium, blooming in perfect white circles around something pale that sat on a flat rock. The flowers shouldn't have been there. It was too early, too cold. But there they were, fresh as if they'd just opened that morning. And in the center of the largest circle was a child's skull. I stopped so fast I almost slipped in the mud. My training kicked in automatically. Possible crime scene. Don't contaminate the evidence. Call for backup. But as I got closer, I realized this wasn't any ordinary crime scene. The skull was old, really old. The bone was yellow and stained, with little holes where the teeth used to be, and it wasn't just sitting there randomly. Someone had placed it carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Pete," I said quietly, "how long ago did you find this?" "About an hour," he said. "But Becca, that ain't all." He pointed to the rock beside the skull. There was a small bundle there, wrapped in what looked like old cloth. Inside were tiny finger bones arranged in a neat little row, and next to that, another bundle, and another. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures, my hands shaking a little. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal, just old bones and flowers on a rock. But when I lowered the camera, I could swear I saw something, moving in the mist behind the trees. "Did you see that?" I asked Pete. He nodded, his face grim. "Something's watching us, Ranger. Has been since we got here." I raised the camera again and snapped a few more shots, then got on my radio to call the county coroner. While I waited for him to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The mist seemed to shift and move in ways that had nothing to do with the wind. And every now and then, I heard something that sounded almost like singing, a woman's voice, soft and sad, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. By the time the coroner arrived, the mist had started to clear, but the cold remained, and so did the feeling of being watched. As we carefully collected the bones and flowers, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's stories. Maybe, I thought as I sealed the last evidence bag, some old tales weren't just stories after all. The coroner's call came 2 days later, and it changed everything. "Becca," Dr. Matthews said over the phone, "you're not going to believe this. Those bones you brought me, they're over 200 years old." I almost dropped the phone. "That's impossible. The flowers were fresh." "I know how it sounds, but I've run every test I can think of. The skull shows signs of ritual preparation, holes drilled for missing teeth, marks where someone cleaned and polished the bone. This is Cherokee work, probably from the late 1700s. I felt that cold feeling creep back into my chest. What about the flowers? That's the weird part. They're fresh, maybe a day old at most. But Becca, mountain laurel doesn't bloom until late April at the earliest. These shouldn't exist. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the photos I'd taken. Everything looked normal in the pictures, just old bones and pretty flowers. But I kept thinking about that feeling of being watched, and the singing, "Gee," I'd heard in the mist. I decided to go back to the site. This time, I brought Mary Sixkiller with me. Mary was a Cherokee elder who sometimes helped with historical interpretation at the visitor center. If anyone could explain what we'd found, it would be her. The walk-up was different in the daylight. The trail was still muddy, but the oppressive cold was gone. Birds were singing, and everything felt normal. I started to think maybe I'd been letting my imagination run away with me. But when we reached the rock where we'd found the bones, Mary stopped dead in her tracks. "Oh, child," she whispered, "what have you stumbled into?" The rock was covered with fresh flowers again, but this time there were more bones. Tiny rib bones arranged in delicate patterns. A small hand, fingers spread like it was reaching for something, and scattered around them more flowers than should have been possible. "Mary," I said carefully, "do you know what this is?" She nodded slowly, never taking her eyes off the display. "It's a mourning garden. We used to make them for children who died without family, children who had no one to remember them." "Used to?" "This practice stopped before my grandmother's time. Whoever is doing this learned it a very long time ago." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were worried. "Becca, there's an old story about a woman who lost all her children to sickness and war. They say she couldn't let go, couldn't accept that they were gone, so she started collecting bones of other children who died alone." I felt my mouth go dry. "The Bone Woman. You know the story?" "My grandmother used to tell it to scare me into staying close to home." Mary knelt down next to the rock, being careful not to disturb anything. "Look at how the bones are arranged. This isn't random. Each one is placed with love, like a mother tucking her child into bed." That's when I noted. Said something that made my blood turn to ice. Mixed in with the old bones was something new, a small plastic toy, the kind you'd get in a Happy Meal. It was clean, like it had just been placed there. "Mary," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "that toy isn't old." She saw it too, and her face went pale. "Someone's still making offerings." I started to reach for my camera, but Mary grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said urgently. "Don't disturb this. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if the stories are true, she's still here. And if she's still collecting—" Mary's voice trailed off. That's when we heard it. Singing, just like I'd heard before. A woman's voice, sad and sweet, coming from the woods around us. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds, and my breath started coming out in little puffs. The singing got closer, and I could almost make out words. Cherokee words, old ones that my grandmother might have known. It was a lullaby, the kind you'd sing to a baby who couldn't sleep. Mary grabbed my arm and pulled me back from the rock. We need to leave, now. But the evidence will still be here tomorrow. Right now we need to go. As we hurried down the muddy trail, I kept looking back over my shoulder. The mist was rolling in again, even though the sun was still shining. And through the white fog, I could swear I saw a tall figure in white moving between the trees. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that lullaby. And I couldn't stop thinking about the plastic toy mixed in with the ancient bones. If the bone woman was real, and if she was still collecting, what else might she be looking for? The answer came the next morning when the first missing child report was filed with the local police. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she was 7 years old. The police called me because she'd gone missing near the forest boundary, close to where we'd found the bone garden. Her mother said Sarah had been playing in their backyard when she just vanished. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. But when I went to the house to offer help with the search, Sarah's little brother Tommy told me something that made my skin crawl. "The pretty bone lady came and got her," he said, his 5-year-old voice matter-of-fact. Sarah was sad because Mom and Dad were fighting again, and the pretty lady said she'd take care of her forever. His mother quickly shushed him. "He's just confused," she said. "Kids make up stories when they're scared." But I remembered the plastic toy among the bones, and I didn't think Tommy was making anything up. I organized search parties, brought in dogs, did everything by the book. But deep down, I knew we weren't going to find Sarah Mitchell walking around lost in the woods. I knew exactly where she was, and the thought made me sick. 3 days into the search, I went back to the bone garden. This time I brought a Cherokee medicine woman named Anna Crow Feather, someone Mary had recommended. If we were dealing with a spirit, I needed to know how to fight it. The walk up the mountain felt like walking into a freezer. With each step, the air got colder and the mist got thicker. By the time we reached the rock, I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. The bone garden had grown. There were now 4 rocks arranged in a perfect square, each one covered with bones and flowers. But these weren't just old bones anymore. Mixed in with the ancient Cherokee remains were newer things. A small sneaker, a hair ribbon, a child's bracelet with Sarah spelled out in plastic beads. Anna sucked in a sharp breath. "She's building a family," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "The bone woman. She's gathering children who died without love, children who were lonely or sad. But she's not just taking the dead ones anymore." Anna pointed to the bracelet. "She's taking the living ones, too." That's when we heard footsteps in the mist. Slow, deliberate steps coming toward us. I reached for my radio, but Anna grabbed my hand. "Don't move," she whispered. "Don't make a sound." The footsteps got closer. Through the fog, I could see a tall shape moving toward us. It was a woman, but not quite right. Too tall, too thin, like someone had stretched her out. She was wearing a long white dress that seemed to float around her feet, but it was her face that made me want to run screaming down the mountain. She was beautiful in a terrible way, with long black hair and dark eyes that looked ancient, but her skin was pale as bone, and when she smiled I could see that her teeth were yellow and worn, like she'd been dead for a very long time. In her arms she was carrying something small and still. "My children," she said, and her voice was like wind through dry leaves. "My beautiful, lonely children. No one loved them enough to keep them safe." She knelt down and gently placed what she was carrying on one of the rocks. It was Sarah Mitchell, but not moving, not breathing. The bone woman arranged her tiny body with the same loving care she'd shown the ancient bones. "She was so sad," the bone woman continued, stroking Sarah's hair. "Her parents fighting, nobody paying attention to her, but I pay attention. I love them all." I wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to do something, but Anna's hand on my arm kept me frozen in place. The bone woman looked up then, and her eyes met mine. When she smiled, I felt something cold wrap around my heart. "You understand, don't you, Rebecca?" she said, and somehow she knew my name. "You were lonely once, too. I remember you as a child, crying in the woods after your parents fought. I was going to take you then. But someone came looking. Someone loved you enough to find you. She was right. I remembered being 7 years old, running into the forest after a terrible fight between my parents. I'd gotten lost and spent the night alone, crying under a big oak tree. My grandmother had found me the next morning. "But you're here now," the bone woman continued. "And you're lonely again, aren't you? No husband, no children of your own, just work and empty rooms." She stood up, and suddenly she was much closer than she should have been, moving without seeming to walk. "I can fix that loneliness," she said. "I can make you part of my family. Forever." That's when Anna acted. She pulled out a small pouch and threw something that looked like dust at the bone woman. The spirit shrieked and stepped back, but she didn't disappear. "Run!" Anna shouted. We ran, down the muddy trail, slipping and sliding with that terrible shriek echoing behind us. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't stop until we reached my truck. "What was that stuff you threw?" I gasped. "Sacred tobacco and cedar," Anna said, breathing hard. "It won't stop her, but it can slow her down. We have to get Sarah's body." "No," Anna said firmly. "That thing you saw wasn't Sarah anymore. The bone woman doesn't just take the living, she keeps them, changes them. They become part of her family forever." I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. What I'd seen on that rock hadn't been a little girl. It had been something else wearing Sarah's shape. "So what do we do?" I asked. Anna looked back up the mountain, where the mist was starting to clear. "We have to find a way to put her to rest," she said, "before she decides she wants more children for her collection." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what the bone woman had said. She'd known about my childhood, about my loneliness. And the terrible thing was, part of what she'd offered sounded tempting. Never being alone again. Having a family, even one made of bones and sorrow. But then I thought about Sarah Mitchell, about her parents who were probably still searching the woods, calling her name. And I knew I had to find a way to stop this thing, no matter what it cost me. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. 2 more children had gone missing during the night. Siblings named Katie and Michael Barnes, ages 6 and 8. Their parents said they'd been fighting a lot. Lately, talking about divorce. The kids had been sad and clingy, afraid their family was falling apart. Perfect targets for the bone woman. I met Anna at the visitor center before dawn. She'd brought an old leather bag filled with things I didn't recognize. Strange herbs, carved stones, and what looked like very old bones. "These belonged to my great-great-grandmother," she said, touching the bag gently. "She was a medicine woman who dealt with spirits that wouldn't move on. If we're going to face the bone woman, we'll need all the help we can get." We also brought Mary Sixkiller, who'd spent the night researching old Cherokee burial rituals. If we were going to put this spirit to rest, we had to do it right. The walk up the mountain was different this time. The mist was gone, replaced by an unnatural stillness. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. When we reached the bone garden, I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. There were now 6 rocks arranged in a perfect circle, each one covered with bones and offerings. The ancient Cherokee remains were still there, but now they were mixed with newer bones. Small ribs, tiny skulls, finger bones no bigger than twigs. And arranged among them like dolls were the children she'd taken. Sarah was still there, but now she was joined by Katie and Michael Barnes. All 3 of them sat perfectly still, their eyes open but empty, like someone had turned off the lights inside their heads. "They're not dead," Anna whispered. "But they're not really alive either." That's when the bone woman appeared. She didn't walk out of the forest or materialize from mist. One second the circle was empty, the next second she was there, tall and terrible in her white dress. But this time I could see her clearly. Her face was gaunt and hollow, like she hadn't eaten in centuries. Her hands are too long, with fingers like bone needles. And her eyes. Her eyes held a sadness so deep it made my chest ache. "You came back," she said, and she sounded pleased. "I knew you would. You understand what it's like to be alone." "Let the children go," I said. surprised by how steady my voice sounded. She tilted her head like a bird. Let them go? But they're happy here. Look at them. No more tears, no more fear. I've given them perfect peace. You've stolen their lives. I've saved them from lives that would have been full of pain. The bone woman moved closer to the rocks, her dress floating around her like smoke. Do you know how many children die alone and unloved? How many cry themselves to sleep every night, wishing someone would care enough to comfort them? She knelt down next to Sarah and stroked her hair with one of those horrible long hands. I lost my own children to the white man's diseases and wars. 7 babies, Rebecca. 7 little ones who died while I watched, helpless to save them. But I learned to save others. By killing them? By loving them. Her voice rose, angry now. I give them what no one else would. Perfect, eternal love. No more hunger, no more cold, no more loneliness. They're part of my family forever. Anna stepped forward, pulling items from her leather bag. Your children are gone, she said gently. They've been gone for over 200 years. It's time to let them rest. The bone woman's face twisted with rage. My children are right here, all of them. She gestured to the circle of bones and silent children. And soon I'll have one more. She looked directly at me, and I felt that cold wrap around my heart again. You were meant to be mine, Rebecca. I've been waiting for you to come back to me. The lonely little girl who ran into my forest, crying for someone to love her. She was moving toward me now, and I couldn't see it. I am to make my legs work. Those terrible eyes held me frozen in place. I can take away all your pain, she whispered. All your loneliness. You'll never have to watch another child suffer. Never have to feel empty again. You'll be part of my family, and my family is eternal. That's when Mary started singing. Old Cherokee words, ancient and powerful. Anna joined in, and suddenly the air around us started to shimmer. The bone woman screamed, a sound like breaking glass and crying babies. She stumbled backward away from me. You don't understand, she shrieked. I'm saving them. I'm the only one who loves them enough. No, I said, finding my voice again. You're keeping them from the love they deserve, from growing up and finding real families, real happiness. I pulled out the old Cherokee blessing pouch Mary had given me and held it up. Your children have been waiting for you to let them go. They're trapped here because of your pain, not your love. Anna had spread her great-great-grandmother's bones in a pattern around the circle. She was chanting now, words so old they seemed to come from the earth itself. The bone woman was changing, becoming less solid. I could see through her white dress to the trees behind her. Please, she whispered. And for the first time, she sounded like what she really was, a mother who had lost everything. Don't take them from me again. You're not losing them, Mary said gently. You're setting them free. All of them. One by one, the ancient bones began to glow with soft white light. The spirits of the Cherokee children the bone woman had collected were appearing, dozens of them, small and translucent but smiling. They walked to the bone woman, their ghostly hands reaching out to touch her face, her hands, her dress. They weren't afraid of her. They were comforting her. Mama, one of them said in a voice like wind chimes, it's time to come home. The bone woman looked at them, really looked, and I saw her face change. The terrible hunger in her eyes faded, replaced by recognition and love. My children, she wreathed. My real children. She knelt down and gathered the spirits into her arms, and as she did, she began to fade as well. Sarah, Katie, and Michael suddenly gasped and blinked, life flooding back into their faces. They looked around, confused and scared, but alive. Thank you, the bone woman whispered to me as she became more and more transparent. Thank you for helping me remember what love really means. Then she was gone, and the circle of bones crumbled to dust. The children were crying now, but they were tears of fear and confusion, not the empty silence of the undead. We gathered them up and carried them down the mountain, back to their families, back to the world of the living. The bone garden was just an empty clearing now, with nothing to show it had ever been anything else. The official report said the 3 missing children were found suffering from exposure and hypothermia in a cave near Cumberland Gap. Nobody questioned why they couldn't remember anything about their time in the woods or why they'd been missing for days but showed no signs of hunger or thirst. Sometimes it's better to let people believe the simple explanation. The area around the bone garden was quietly designated as an archaeological site and closed to public access. The state said it was to protect Cherokee burial grounds, which wasn't exactly a lie. I personally made sure the barriers went up and the warning signs were posted. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I sometimes drive up there just to check. The clearing stays empty now, just grass and wildflowers that bloom in their proper season. But once in a while I find fresh flowers arranged in small circles. Not the desperate, grasping patterns the bone woman used to make, but gentle, peaceful arrangements that look like gifts. Mary Sixkiller says those are offerings from grateful spirits, children whose bones the bone man had collected over the centuries and who are finally at rest. I like to think she's right. I kept the Cherokee blessing pouch Anna gave me, and I carry it everywhere now. Not because I'm afraid of the bone woman. She's at peace, reunited with her own children in whatever comes after this life. But because there are other spirits out there, other lost souls who love too hard and hold on too tight. 3 months after the incident, I got a call from a park ranger in Tennessee. They'd found animal bones arranged in perfect spirals near an old battlefield, and hikers were reporting feeling watched in the woods. The description sounded familiar, too familiar. I told him I'd drive down the next weekend to take a look. The thing about working in places where the past runs deep is that you learn the dead don't always stay buried, especially when they died with unfinished business. Love can be just as powerful as hate when it comes to keeping spirits anchored to this world, sometimes more powerful. Sarah, Katie, and Michael are all doing well now. Their families got counseling, worked through their problems, learned to talk instead of fight. The kids don't remember their time with the bone woman, which is probably for the best. But sometimes I see them around town, and they wave at me like they recognize something in me, some shared experience they can't quite name. I understand now why my grandmother told those old stories. They weren't just fairy tales meant to scare children into staying close to home. They were warnings, passed down through generations, about the things that wait in the dark places of the world, things that hunger for the love they never had or lost long ago. The Cherokee have a saying, "What we don't honor comes back to haunt us." The bone woman haunted these mountains for over 200 years because nobody honored her grief. Nobody helped her heal from losing her children. She became a monster because her love had nowhere to go except deeper and deeper into darkness. But love, real love, means knowing when to let go. It means wanting the best for someone even when that best doesn't include you. The bone woman finally learned that lesson, and in learning it she found peace. I still walk those trails every day, keeping an eye on things, making sure the barriers stay up and the warnings stay posted. And sometimes, when the mist rolls in thick and the air gets cold, I whisper a little prayer for all the lost children, the ones who found their way home, and the ones still waiting to be found. Because the truth is, there are always more lonely children in the world than there are people willing to love them. And where there's that kind of pain, that kind of desperate need, there's always the chance that something else might start collecting what others have left behind. But that's a story for another day. My name is Vernon Calloway, but folks just call me Vern. Been patrolling these mountains longer than most y'all been alive. 17 years working the Monongahela National Forest, and I ain't seen nothing yet that couldn't be explained with common sense and hard facts. I'm 44 now, 3rd generation born and raised in these West Virginia hills. My granddaddy worked the mines before they played out, and my daddy did too, until that cave-in took him and my younger brother Bobby when I was just 18. That's when I decided the mountains above ground were safer than the darkness below. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I came back home and got myself certified as an EMT. The Forest Service hired me on account of my military experience and my knowledge of these hills. Been doing backcountry patrol and wilderness search and rescue ever since. 212 successful rescues to my name, and I'm proud of every one. My beat covers Black Rock Ridge in the Dolly Sods Wilderness area, some of the most remote country you'll find in West Virginia. 15 miles from the nearest road on foot, and the radio don't work worth a damn down in them valleys. It's October 1978, and we got an early frost coming. The leaves are turning, hunting season's about to start, and the fog's been hanging thick in the hollows for weeks now. Now, I've heard all them stories about the hollow folk, mountain families that went so far back in the hills they forgot how to be human. Old-timers talk about empty people wandering the ridges, folks who look normal from a distance but got something missing inside. I always figured it was just superstition, maybe some inbred families hiding out from the law. But I carry my gear proper. Standard issue Motorola HT220 radio, Brunton compass that never fails me, first aid kit, and enough supplies for 3 days. I know every trail, every creek, every system in my sector. These mountains don't hold secrets from me. That's what I thought anyway, until them bow hunters came stumbling into the ranger station that October morning, white as fresh snow and shaking like leaves in a windstorm. "Something ain't right up on Black Rock," said the oldest one, a man named Carl Patterson I'd known since school. "We seen people watching us from the tree line, but they weren't right." "What you mean, not right?" I asked, pouring him some coffee. His hands shook so bad he could barely hold the cup. "Their eyes," whispered the youngest hunter. Couldn't have been more than 20. They were empty, like looking into a deep well with no bottom. Carl nodded. They'd just stand there, perfectly still, for hours. Never moved, never blinked. But they were watching us. Always watching. I took down their report, marked their campsite location on my map. Probably just some local folks checking out the hunters, maybe worried about their property lines. Happens all the time during hunting season. "You boys probably just spooked yourselves," I told them. "But I'll head up there this afternoon, take a look around, make sure everything's proper." But even as I said it, something cold settled in my stomach. In 17 years patrolling these mountains, I'd never seen Carl Patterson scared of anything. And that young hunter's eyes, they had the same hollow look I'd seen on soldiers coming back from bad patrols in the jungle. I loaded my pack, checked my radio twice, and headed up the trail toward Black Rock Ridge. The fog was thicker than usual, and the woods were too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. The hike up to the hunter's campsite took me 3 hours through fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The trail was slick with dew, and my breath came out in white puffs despite the weather being warmer than usual for October. About halfway up, I noticed something wrong. The forest was dead quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, not even the buzz of insects. In all my years in these woods, I'd never heard such complete silence. It made my skin crawl. I found the hunter's camp just before sunset, set up proper in a clearing near Bear Creek. But the hunters were gone. Their tents were still standing, sleeping bags laid out neat, and there was a pot of coffee on the camp stove still warm to the touch. Fresh biscuits sat on a camp table, barely touched. That's when I found the first really strange thing. All 3 hunting bows were unstrung and laid out careful on a tarp, arrows sorted by type. No hunter I ever knew would take time to organize his gear like that if he was leaving in a hurry. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Calloway. I'm at the hunter's camp, but nobody's here. Looks like they left sudden, but their gear's still warm." Static crackled back at me, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children's voices, speaking words I couldn't understand, but played backwards like a record running in reverse. I switched channels, tried again. Same thing. The radio was working, but whatever was coming through wasn't from any human throat. I pulled out my compass to check my bearings, and the needle was spinning like a top. North, south, east, west. It couldn't decide where it wanted to point. I tapped the glass, shook it, but that needle just kept spinning. That's when I found Carl Patterson's journal, left open on the picnic table. The last entry was dated that morning. Third day. They're still watching us. 3 of them now, standing in the tree line about 50 yards out. Been there since dawn. Jimmy threw a rock at one yesterday. Went right through it like it wasn't there. But we can see them breathing. We can see them watching. Their eyes, God help me. Their eyes are like empty holes. We're packing up, getting out of here before dark. But they hadn't packed up. Their gear was still here, still organized like they'd planned, to stay another week. I circled the camp looking for tracks, found them easy enough in the soft earth by the creek, 3 sets of boot prints heading toward the tree line. But as I followed them, something made my stomach turn over. The prints looked normal at first glance, but when I knelt down and examined them close, I could see they weren't pressed into the earth proper. They sat on top of the mud, like whoever made them weighed nothing at all. And they were perfect. Too perfect. No scuff marks, no toe drag, no natural wear patterns. I followed the tracks to the tree line, and that's where they got impossible. The footprints led straight to the base of a 30-foot cliff face and continued right up the vertical rock wall like whoever made them could walk on stone like it was flat ground. I looked up that cliff face and saw something that nearly stopped my heart. A man was standing on a narrow ledge about 20 feet up, perfectly still, watching me. He wore hunting clothes like the missing men, but something about him was all wrong. His arms hung loose at his sides and his head was tilted at an angle that should have hurt his neck. "Hey," I called up to him. "You one of the hunters? You okay up there?" He didn't answer. Didn't even blink. Just kept staring down at me with eyes that looked like black holes in his face. I scrambled up the rocks best I could, but by the time I reached the ledge, he was gone. No footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. But the rock was cold to the touch, colder than the October air had any right to make it. I made camp that night in the hunter's clearing, figuring I'd search more come morning. But I barely slept. All night long, I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness beyond my fire, and sometimes when the wind was just right, I could hear breathing that didn't match my own. Come morning, I radioed for backup. My partner Jake Morrison had been working with me for 3 years. Solid man, grew up in these hills, same as me. If something strange was happening on Black Rock Ridge, I wanted someone I trusted watching my back. Jake arrived around noon with 2 tracking dogs, Blue and Scout. These were experienced hounds that had helped us find dozens of lost hikers over the years. But the moment they caught scent of those impossible tracks, they started whimpering and backing away. "What's got into them?" Jake asked, trying to coax Blue forward with a treat. "Same thing that's got into everything else up here," I said, showing him the journal and the weightless footprints. Jake was a skeptical man, trained in search and rescue, same as me. But when he saw those tracks continuing up that cliff face, his face went pale. "That ain't possible," he muttered. "Tell that to whoever made them." We decided to split up, cover more ground. Jake would follow the creek downstream while I checked the old mining ruins up the ridge. We'd meet back at camp by sunset. The mine entrance was about 2 miles uphill through thick forest. I'd been there before, just a boarded-up shaft from the 1920s coal operations that played out decades ago. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The mine was breathing. I know how that sounds, but I swear on my brother's grave, that entrance was drawing air in and pushing it out like a giant lung. The boards across the opening flexed inward and outward in a steady rhythm, and cold air puffed out with each exhale. I approached careful, hand on my flashlight. The boards were old but solid, nailed tight across the opening. No way anyone could have gotten inside. But between the gaps, I could see darkness that seemed deeper than any shadow had a right to be. That's when I heard Jake calling my name from somewhere in the woods behind me. But something was wrong with his voice. It was flat, empty of emotion, like he was reading words off a page. "Vern," came his voice again, closer now. "Come see what I found." I turned and saw Jake walking toward me through the trees, but he was moving all wrong. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground, and his arms swayed without purpose. When he got close enough for me to see his face, my blood went cold. Jake's eyes were empty, not blind. Empty. Like someone had scooped out everything that made him Jake and left just the shell walking around. "Jake?" I called. "You all right, partner?" He stopped about 10 feet away and tilted his head at that unnatural angle I'd seen before. "Found them," he said in that flat, dead voice. "The hunters. They're down in the dark. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Jake smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, and it didn't reach those empty eyes. "For you to come home." I backed toward the mine entrance, hand moving to the emergency flare gun on my belt. This wasn't Jake anymore. This was something wearing Jake's face. "Where are they?" I asked. "Where are the real hunters?" Jake pointed toward the breathing mine shaft. "Down there, in the hollow places, where the coal used to be." That's when I remembered what old-timer Ezra Walsh had told me years ago about the mining disaster. 37 men died when that shaft collapsed in 1923. The company sealed it up and left, but Ezra claimed something else got sealed in with those miners, something that had been feeding on coal and darkness for so long it had forgotten what light was like. "The hollow places in the earth," Ezra had said, "make hollow places in men." I looked at Jake, or what was left of him, and started to understand. The mine hadn't just killed those men. It had taken something from them, left them empty, and now it was doing the same thing to anyone who got too close. "You need to come with us, Vern," Jake said, taking a step closer. "It doesn't hurt. You just let go. Let it all drain away." Behind him I could see more figures moving through, the trees. The 3 missing hunters, walking with that same empty gait, their eyes like dark wells. I pulled the flare gun and fired it straight up into the sky. The red light burst, overhead, casting everything in bloody shadows. For just a second, I could see what they really were. They weren't solid. The light passed right through them, showing the trees behind. But their eyes. Their eyes were holes in the world itself, leading down to some place I didn't want to think about. The flare light faded, and they started moving toward me again, slow and patient, like they had all the time in the world. That's when I ran. I crashed through the woods like a spooked deer, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running, just walking with that steady, patient pace. They didn't need to hurry. They knew these mountains better than I did now. I made it back to the hunters' camp as the sun was setting, my lungs burning and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But the camp wasn't empty anymore. A dozen figures stood in a circle around the cold fire pit. The 3 missing hunters, Jake, and others I didn't recognize. Some wore clothes from decades past, mining overalls, old-style work boots. Others looked more recent, like hikers or hunters who'd gone missing over the years. They all had the same empty eyes, the same unnatural stillness. In the center of the circle sat an old man I recognized from town, Ezra Walsh, the one who'd told me about the mining disaster. But his eyes weren't empty. They were bright with fear and pain. "Vern," he whispered, "don't let them touch you. Once they touch you, they start draining the life right out. They took most of mine already, but I've been fighting it." The hollow men turned to look at me as I stepped into the clearing. Jake smiled that terrible, empty smile. "We've been waiting," he said. "We want to show you something wonderful." They started closing in, moving with that weightless step. I backed toward the cliff, looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. "The mine," Ezra gasped. "Explosion opened something up. A crack between worlds. The coal wasn't all that was buried down there. Something else was waiting in the deep dark. Something hungry." I understood now. The mining disaster hadn't just killed those men. It had opened a doorway to some place where souls got lost. The hollow men were the result, empty shells that had to feed on life to keep their forms together. "What do you want?" I shouted at them. "To go home," said one of the miners in clothes from the 1920s. "But we can't go alone. We need company. We need you to be like us." They reached for me with pale hands, and I felt cold like winter settling into my bones. Just their nearness was draining something vital from me. I could feel my strength, my will, my very self starting to leak away. But then I remembered the emergency kit in my pack. Every ranger carried dynamite for trail clearing and rockfall removal. And in my helmet was something else. An old mining light my granddaddy had given me, made of iron and blessed silver. I switched on the helmet light, and the hollow men shrieked and stepped back. The light wasn't just bright. It was warm, full of life in a way that hurt them. "Iron and silver," whispered Ezra. "They can't stand it. Reminds them what they used to be." I pulled out 2 sticks of dynamite and the electric detonator. "You want to go home? I'll help you get there." I ran for the mine entrance with the hollow men following, their forms flickering and wavering in the light from my helmet. The breathing of the mine shaft grew stronger as I approached, and I could feel it trying to pull me in. But I wasn't going in. I was going to close the door. I shoved the dynamite into the breathing gap between the boards, set the timer for 30 seconds, and ran like hell. The explosion lit up the entire ridge, and the scream that came from T.I.'s at mine shaft was like nothing I'd ever heard. It was the sound of 30 men dying all over again, and something else, something that had been waiting in the dark for 55 years, finally being forced back where it belonged. When the smoke cleared, the mine entrance had collapsed completely, and the hollow men were gone, all except Jake. He was lying on the ground near the camp, breathing hard, but with life starting to return to his eyes. "Vern?" he whispered. "What happened?" I remember following tracks by the creek, and then nothing. The state authorities came in 2 days later, after I'd hiked out and made my report. They sealed off the area, citing geological instability from the mine collapse. The missing hunters were listed as lost to exposure, their bodies never found. Jake recovered mostly. But he was never quite the same after that. Sometimes he'd stare off into space for long minutes, like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. He transferred to a different district 6 months later. I put in for a transfer too, but they needed experienced rangers in less remote areas. I stayed on another 3 years before I finally couldn't take it anymore. The deep woods felt wrong to me now, too quiet, too watching. I kept that mining helmet my granddaddy gave me, and I never go into the backcountry without it. The iron and blessed silver saved my life that night, and I reckon it might again someday. Because I know now that there are places in these mountains where the world got torn, and things that should stay buried don't always stay that way. The reports still come in sometimes. Hikers talking about empty people watching them from the tree line. Hunters finding camps abandoned with fresh coffee still warm. Rangers going out on routine patrol and coming back different, if they come back at all. I work a desk job now, in the main office in Charleston. But sometimes, when new rangers come through for training, I tell them about Black Rock Ridge. Most think it's just a scary story to keep them careful in the wilderness. But the smart ones, the ones who really listen, they see the truth in my eyes. They understand that some holes in the ground lead to places that shouldn't exist, and some people walking around aren't really people anymore. If you ever find yourself camping in the old mining country, and you see someone standing perfectly still in the tree line, watching you with eyes like empty wells, don't try to talk to them. Don't throw rocks at them. Don't investigate. Just pack up your gear and get out as fast as you can, because once they start watching you, they don't ever really stop. And whatever you do, don't look too long into the eyes of strangers in them old mining towns. You might find that they're looking back at you from someplace deeper than any mine shaft ever went. The hollow men of Black Rock Ridge are gone now, sent back to whatever dark place they came from. But the ridge itself remembers. And sometimes, when the fog rolls thick through the valleys and the woods get too quiet, I wonder if that crack between worlds is really sealed as tight as I hope it is. My name is Vernon Calloway, and I'm telling you this story because you need to know. The mountains hold secrets, and some of them are hungry. Keep your lights burning bright. trust your iron and silver, and remember, not everyone walking around out there is really alive. The hollow places in the earth make hollow places in men. And once you're hollow, there ain't no going back. My name is Thomas Whitaker, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been working as a fire tower ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest for 20 years now. 20 years of watching the mountains, checking the weather, and keeping folks safe from wildfires. Before this job, I spent 8 years in the Air Force working with radar equipment. I know the difference between a real signal and equipment failure. I know how to read the sky and trust my instruments. That's important for what I'm about to tell you. My tower sits on Brasstown Bald, the highest peak in all of Georgia. On a clear day, I can see 4 states from up here. It's beautiful, but it's also the loneliest job you can imagine. The nearest town is 30 miles away through winding mountain roads. Most days, I don't see another human being. I like it that way, mostly. The quiet helps me think. The mountains have their own rhythm. Birds singing at dawn, wind through the pines, crickets at night. After 20 years, I know every sound these mountains make. That's why September of 1976 felt so wrong. It started with the Cherokee stories my grandmother used to tell. She'd grown up hearing tales about the moon-eyed people, pale folks who lived underground and couldn't stand sunlight. According to the stories, they had huge eyes that glowed in the dark and could see things normal people couldn't. Just old tales about albino mountain folk, I always figured. People who had to hide from the sun. But that September, during the harvest moon, something changed in my mountains. The first sign was the silence. I'd been tracking the weather all week. Perfect clear skies, warm days, cool nights. Perfect conditions for the usual September sounds. But by the third night of the full moon, I realized something was missing. No crickets. In 20 years, I'd never heard such complete quiet during cricket season. I checked my weather instruments twice. Temperature was right, humidity was normal, barometric pressure steady. There was no reason for the silence. I stepped out onto the tower's observation deck and listened harder. Nothing, not even wind through the trees. The forest below me looked like a black ocean under the bright moonlight, but it felt empty. That's when I heard my radar equipment start beeping. I rushed back inside and checked the display. Green dots were moving across my screen in patterns I'd never seen before, not random like deer or bears. These dots moved in straight lines, making sharp turns, forming shapes. I'd seen plenty of equipment problems in my time. Radar ghosts, interference from radio towers, temperature inversions that could trick the signals. But this looked organized, planned. I grabbed my binoculars and went back outside. The moonlight was so bright I could see the mountainside clearly. At first, nothing looked different. Then I saw them. Pale figures moving through the trees below. They walked in single file, maybe 20 or 30 of them. Even from a distance, I could tell something wasn't right about how they moved. Too smooth, too quiet. And they all seemed to be heading in the same direction, toward my tower. I watched for 10 minutes, following them with my binoculars as they moved up the mountain paths. Their skin looked white as milk in the moonlight, and they never stumbled or hesitated, even on the rough ground. Then one of them stopped and looked up at me. Even from half a mile away, I could see its eyes, large and bright, glowing with their own light. It stared at me for a long moment, then raised one arm and pointed directly at my tower. The others stopped too. All of them turned to look at me with those huge, shining eyes. I stepped back from the railing, my heart pounding. When I looked again a minute later, they were gone. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the radar, looking out the windows, listening for sounds that never came. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks in the bright moonlight. But when I climbed down to check my equipment, I found the first stone circle. It was about 10 feet across, made of smooth rocks arranged in a perfect ring. The stones weren't local, they looked like river rocks, polished and round. But the nearest stream was miles away, and these rocks were huge. Each one must have weighed 50 pounds or more. The circle sat right at the base of my tower. I'd walked that same path 100 times before. It definitely hadn't been there yesterday. I took pictures and measured the circle carefully. The stones were placed exactly 18 inches apart. The circle faced due east, lined up perfectly with where the sun would rise. That afternoon, my relief ranger, Jimmy Maddox, arrived for his shift change. Jimmy was a good kid, about 25, fresh out of forestry school. He took one look at the stone circle and whistled low. "That's some precision work, Tom. You think it's kids messing around?" "With 50-pound rocks?" I asked. "Besides, how'd they get up here without a truck? No tire tracks on the access road." Jimmy walked around the circle, taking his own pictures. "Looks almost like Cherokee work. You know, like those old ceremonial sites they find sometimes." That night, I stayed to help Jimmy with his first full moon shift. I told him about the pale figures I'd seen, but I kept it simple. Just said I'd spotted some folks wandering around in the moonlight. Around midnight, my radio started picking up transmissions. At first, it sounded like static. Then I realized it was voices speaking in some kind of pattern. Not English, not Cherokee, not Spanish. Nothing I recognized. The voices were high and musical, almost like singing. "You hearing this, Jimmy?" He put on the headphones and listened for a minute. His face went pale. "That's not coming from any of our stations. What frequency is this?" I checked. The dial. We were tuned to the standard Forest Service channel, but these voices were coming through clear as day, talking over our normal radio traffic. Then the radar started going crazy. Green dots appeared all around the tower, moving in those same organized patterns. But this time, there were more of them, maybe 50 or 60. They formed lines and circles, shapes that looked almost like writing. "Tom," Jimmy whispered, "look outside." I grabbed my binoculars and stepped onto the deck. The mountainside was full of pale figures. They moved between the trees like ghosts, their skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. Some carried what looked like long staffs or poles. Others held objects that gave off their own light. "How many do you count?" I asked. Jimmy had his own binoculars up. I can't get an exact number. They keep moving behind trees, but there's a lot of them." As we watched, the figures began forming the same patterns I'd seen on the radar screen. Circles within circles, straight lines connecting different points, like they were drawing some kind of diagram on the mountainside itself. Then I noticed their eyes. Every single one of them had huge, luminous eyes that seemed to capture and reflect the moonlight. When they turned to look up at our tower, those eyes blazed like car headlights. "Jimmy," I said quietly, "I need you to get on the radio and call the state police." "What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them we've got trespassers on government land, armed trespassers." But when Jimmy tried to use the radio, all we got was more of that strange singing. The voices had taken over every channel. No matter where we tuned, we couldn't reach the outside world. That's when the pale figures started climbing toward our tower. They moved up the steep mountainside like it was flat ground. No stumbling, no grabbing at trees for support. They flowed up the slope like water running uphill. "We need to get out of here," Jimmy said, his voice shaking. But there was nowhere to go. The access road ran right past where the figures were climbing. Our truck was parked at the bottom of the tower, and we'd have to go through them to reach it. We were trapped. The pale figures surrounded our tower just as the moon reached its highest point in the sky. I counted at least 60 of them, standing in perfect circles around the base of our platform. They didn't move or make any sound. They just stood there, looking up at us with those huge, glowing eyes. Up close, I could see they weren't quite human. Their skin was milk white and seemed to give off a faint light of its own. They were thin and tall, maybe 7 feet each, with long arms and fingers. Their eyes took up half their faces, enormous, silver-white orbs that never seemed to blink. They wore simple clothes that looked handmade, like rough cloth or leather. Some carried those long staffs I'd seen, carved with strange symbols. Others held what looked like crystals or stones that pulsed with soft light. "What do they want?" Jimmy whispered. Before I could answer, one of the figures stepped forward. It raised its staff and pointed it at our tower. The crystal at the tip began to glow brighter. Then the light started. Pulses of white light shot up from the figure's staff, hitting the metal framework of our tower. The lights came in patterns. 3 short flashes, then 2 long ones, then 3 short again, over and over. "That's Morse code," I said suddenly. ... SOS. More figures raised their staffs. Soon the whole tower was lit up with flashing patterns of light. But these weren't random signals. As I watched and counted, I realized they were showing us numbers. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, then square roots, then what looked like astronomical calculations. "They're trying to communicate," I told Jimmy. "They're showing us they understand mathematics." Jimmy stared down at the figures with wide eyes. "How is that, Poe? Sybil?" That's when the first one started to climb. It didn't use the ladder like a normal person would. Instead, it pressed its hands against the metal support beams and somehow stuck to them, climbing straight up the side of the tower like a spider. "Get the rifle," I shouted. We kept a 30-06 in the tower for emergency situations, bears mostly, or to signal for help if the radio failed. Jimmy grabbed it from the equipment locker while I watched the climbing figure. It moved with impossible grace, never losing its grip, never hesitating about where to place its hands or feet. Its eyes stayed locked on mine the whole time, glowing like twin stars. When it was about 20 feet below our platform, I called out, "That's far enough. This is government property. You need to leave now." The figure stopped climbing. It tilted its head to one side, studying me. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. The voice was like music, high and clear, but the words were in that same strange language I'd heard on the radio. It spoke for maybe 30 seconds, never breaking eye contact with me. When it finished, it held up one hand, palm facing me. The palm began to glow with soft white light. Symbols appeared in the light, not carved or painted, but made of pure illumination. Numbers, star charts, mathematical formulas I recognized from my Air Force training. "It's showing us navigation data," I breathed. "Star positions, celestial coordinates." The figure nodded as if it understood my words. Then it began to climb again. "Tom, what do I do?" Jimmy had the rifle aimed, but his hands were shaking. "Wait," I said. Something about the figure's movements didn't seem threatening. Curious, maybe, but not hostile. It reached the platform and gracefully pulled itself over the railing. Standing up, it was even taller than I'd thought, maybe 8 feet. Its skin wasn't just white, I realized. It was translucent. I could see faint patterns beneath the surface, like veins but glowing with that same soft light. The figure looked around our equipment with obvious interest. It studied the radar screen, the weather instruments, the radio. Then it pointed at each device and spoke a single word in its musical language. "I think it's asking what these things do," I said. Slowly, carefully, I moved to the radar screen. The figure watched, but didn't try to stop me. I pointed at the display, then gestured toward the mountainside below. "This shows us where things are moving," I said simply. The figure nodded. It approached the screen and studied the green dots that were still showing its companions below. Then it touched the screen with one long finger. The radar went crazy. New dots appeared all over the display, not just around our tower, but scattered across miles of mountainside. Dozens of them, hundreds. "There are more," the figure said in perfect English. Jimmy and I stared at it in shock. "You speak our language?" I managed to ask. "We learned quickly. We have been listening to your words, your signals, for many years." The figure's voice was still musical, but now I could understand every word. "We know your people have forgotten the old agreements." "What agreements?" The figure gestured toward the forest below. "This land was shared once. Your Cherokee ancestors knew of us. We stayed below. They stayed above. Both peoples lived in peace." "But the Cherokee are gone from here now," I said. "Yes. And your new people do not remember. They build roads, cut trees, send signals into the deep places. They disturb the balance. More figures were climbing the tower now. They moved up the metal framework like it was nothing surrounding our platform. But they kept their distance, forming a respectful circle around the first one. "We are the moon-eyed people," the figure continued. "We have lived in the deep mountains since before your kind walked on two legs. We were here when the great ice came and went. We were here when the first Cherokee arrived, and we will be here when you are dust." "What do you want from us?" I asked. The figure's huge eyes seemed to grow even brighter. "We want to know if your people can still learn wisdom, or if they will force us to protect ourselves." The moon-eyed people's leader studied our equipment with the patience of something that had lived for centuries. It touched each instrument carefully, asking questions about how they worked and what they measured. "Your people have learned much about the sky," it said, examining our weather monitoring gear. "But you have forgotten how to listen to the earth." "What do you mean?" I asked. Instead of answering, the figure moved to our radio. It placed its palm against the speaker, and suddenly the static cleared. New voices came through, not the musical language from before, but something else entirely. Deep, rumbling sounds that seemed to come from underground. Long, slow calls that reminded me of whale songs, but somehow different, older. "The mountains speak," the figure explained. "The deep places have their own voices. Your people's noise drowns out these older conversations." Jimmy finally found his voice. "How many of you are there?" The figure turned those huge, glowing eyes on him. "Enough. We have cities beneath your feet. Gardens that have never seen sunlight. Libraries of knowledge that predate your written history." It gestured to the other moon-eyed people surrounding our platform. "These are our watchers. We send them to the surface when the moon is full, when our eyes can bear the brightness. They observe your people and report back to the councils below." "What do your councils decide?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Whether your people can be trusted, whether they will respect the old boundaries, whether they pose a threat to our survival." The figure moved to the window facing east. The moon was starting to set, but there were still several hours until dawn. "For 20 years we have watched you, Thomas Whitaker. You understand the mountains. You listen more than you speak. You respect what you do not understand." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You've been watching me specifically? The deep places need guardians on the surface, humans who can serve as bridges between our peoples. And if I say no?" The figure was quiet for a long moment. Then it pointed out the window toward the forest below. The pale shapes of moon-eyed people were moving between the trees, but now I could see there were far more of them than before. Hundreds, maybe thousands, covering the entire mountainside like a glowing army. "Your people have weapons that could harm us," the figure said calmly. "Machines that could dig into our deep places. Poisons that could poison our water. If we decide your people are a threat, we will protect ourselves." "How?" Jimmy asked. "We control the deep earth. We can cause landslides, floods, earthquakes. We can make mountains fall and rivers change course. We have done these things before when necessary." I thought about all the strange geological events in Appalachian history. Sudden sinkholes, unexplained landslides, changes in underground water flow. "You've been protecting yourselves all along. When we must, but we prefer peace." The figure approached me again. "You understand the sky, Thomas Whitaker. You read weather patterns, track storms, predict changes. We need someone who can also learn to read the deep patterns, the movements of stone and water and root that happen beneath your people's notice. You want me to spy on humans for you?" "We want you to help prevent a war." It held out one of those glowing crystals I'd seen the other figures carrying. Up close, I could see it wasn't really a crystal at all, but something organic, like a large pearl, but with light moving inside it. "This will let you hear the deep voices. It will show you the patterns we see. In return, you will help us understand when your people's activities might disturb the balance below." I looked at Jimmy, who was staring at the crystal with fascination and terror. Then I looked out at the army of moon-eyed people waiting in the forest. What happens if your people decide humans are too dangerous? The figure's expression didn't change, but somehow its eyes seemed sadder. Then the mountains will reclaim themselves. Your cities will sink. Your roads will be swallowed. Your people will learn that they were never really in control of this land. I thought about my 20 years in these mountains, all the fires I'd prevented, the hikers I'd helped rescue, the storms I'd tracked and warned people about. I'd spent my whole adult life trying to protect these peaks and the people who visited them. Now I was being asked to protect them in a completely different way. If I do this, I said slowly, what guarantees do I have? How do I know your people won't decide to eliminate humans anyway? You have our word. And more than that, you will have knowledge. You will understand the true age and wisdom of the earth. You will see patterns that have repeated for millions of years. You will become part of something larger than your short human lifespan. The figure held the glowing crystal closer to me. Choose quickly, Thomas Whitaker. Dawn comes, and we must return to the deep places before the sun rises. Your answer will determine whether we meet again in peace or in conflict. I looked out at the mountains I'd called home for 20 years. Then I looked at the army of ancient beings waiting for my decision. I took the crystal. The moment the crystal touched my palm, everything changed. I could hear the mountains breathing, deep, slow rhythms that pulsed through miles of stone and earth. I could feel the underground rivers flowing like arteries, carrying life through the darkness. I could sense the vast cities, the moon. Eyed people had built in natural caverns, lit by their own bodies, sustained by roots and fungi that had never seen daylight. And I could hear their voices, thousands of them, singing in harmonies that had echoed through these depths for countless centuries. Now you understand, the figure said. This is what we protect. This is what your people's progress threatens. The knowledge was overwhelming. I saw how human activity affected the deep places. Vibrations from heavy machinery disturbing ancient structures, chemical runoff poisoning underground streams, noise drowning out communications that had existed since before humans evolved. But I also saw the moon-eyed people's own history, how they'd survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and the rise and fall of countless surface civilizations, how they'd learned to adapt and endure by staying hidden, staying careful, staying patient. The Cherokee knew of you, I said, understanding flooding through me. They made agreements. The Cherokee understood balance. They took only what they needed and gave back more than they took. They honored the deep places and the beings who lived there. Jimmy was staring at me with wide eyes. Tom, what's happening to you? I looked down at my hands. The crystal had stopped glowing, but I could feel it pulsing gently in my palm. The knowledge it had given me was settling into my mind like memories I'd always had, but forgotten. I'm learning, I told him, about the real history of these mountains. The leader of the moon-eyed people gestured to its companions. We must go now. The sun comes soon, and its light burns our skin. They began moving toward the edges of the platform, preparing to climb back down. But the leader stopped beside me. You will stay in your tower, Thomas Whitaker. You will continue your work watching the sky and the weather. But now you will also watch for signs of disturbance in the deep places. How will I contact you? The crystal will show you when we need to speak. Usually during the dark moon, when our people can move safely on the surface. So, the figure paused. And sometimes we will contact you. If your people's activities become too dangerous, we will need warning. What about Jimmy? The leader looked at the younger ranger who was still clutching the rifle he'd never used. He may stay and learn if he wishes, but he must choose freely, with full knowledge of what it means. Jimmy swallowed hard. What does it mean? It means you become a guardian of secrets that could change your world. It means you must sometimes choose between loyalty to your own species and loyalty to the deeper truths of this earth. Jimmy looked at me, then at the crystal in my hand, then at the pale figures preparing to descend into the darkness. I need time to think. You have until the next full moon, the leader said. If you choose to join us, return to this tower when the moon is full again. If not, you will forget this night. The crystal's power can remove memories as easily as it grants them. The other moon-eyed people had already begun their descent, flowing down the metal framework like water. The leader was the last to go. Remember, Thomas Whitaker, your people are not the first to think they own these mountains. Many civilizations have risen and fallen while we watched from below. Your cities will crumble eventually, but the deep places endure. Help us make sure both our peoples survive to see what comes next. It climbed over the railing and disappeared into the darkness below. Jimmy and I stood alone on the platform as dawn began to brighten the eastern sky. The forest looked normal again. No pale figures, no glowing eyes, no sign that anything unusual had happened, except for the stone circle at the base of our tower, and the crystal warm in my palm, and the deep voices I could still hear singing in the earth below my feet. "Tom," Jimmy said quietly, "what do we do now?" I looked out at the mountain, inns that had been my home for 20 years. They looked the same as always, but now I knew they held secrets older than human civilization. Now I understood that I was not just a fire watcher, but a guardian of something much more important. "We do our job," I said. "We watch for fires and track the weather and help people when they get lost. But we also learn to listen for other things, older things." Jimmy nodded slowly. "Are you going to report this?" I thought about calling the state police, trying to explain what had happened. I thought about government scientists swarming over the mountains, trying to find the moon-eyed people and their hidden cities. I thought about the army of pale figures I'd seen and what they might do to protect themselves. "No," I said. "This stays between us, at least for now." The sun was fully up now, painting the mountainside in gold and green. Somewhere far below my feet, an ancient civilization was settling down for its daily rest, trusting that their secrets were safe with a lonely fire watcher who'd just learned that his small corner of the world was far stranger and more precious than he'd ever imagined. I still work that tower today, 48 years later. I still watch for fires and track storms and help lost hikers find their way home. But I also listen to the deeper voices, the older songs, the patient breathing of mountains that have stories to tell. The moon-eyed people and I have kept our bargain all these years. I've helped prevent a dozen accidents that could have disturbed their deep places. They've helped me understand weather patterns and geological changes that have saved countless human lives. Jimmy decided to join us in the end. He's retired now, but he still comes up to the tower during the dark moons when the pale watchers emerge to share news from the depths. We've never told anyone else about our arrangement. But if you're ever hiking alone in the Georgia mountains on a clear night and you hear strange music echoing from underground or see lights moving between the trees that don't quite to look like flashlights, remember this: the mountains are older than you think, and they're still inhabited by their original owners, who are watching and waiting to see what kind of neighbors we'll choose to be. The stone circles still appear before major astronomical events. And if you know how to look, if you have the right kind of crystal warm in your palm, you can still see pale figures moving through the forest when the moon is dark, keeping their ancient vigil over the deep places of the earth. My name is Michael Eastwood, but everyone calls me Mike. For 15 years, I've worked as a ranger at New River Gorge in West Virginia. People think being a park ranger is easy, just walking around pretty trails all day. But my job is different. I work water safety and river rescue. When someone falls in that cold, fast water, I'm the guy who goes in after them. The New River runs deep and strong under our famous bridge. That steel giant stretches 3,030 feet across the gorge, 876 feet above the water. On a clear day, it's beautiful. On a dark night in November, it looks like a monster's mouth waiting to swallow you whole. I should tell you about my background. Before this job, I spent 8 years as a Navy diver. I've seen things underwater that would make most people never want to swim again. Sunken ships full of bones. Planes crashed so deep the pressure could crush you. I've pulled 150 people out of rivers, lakes, and oceans, some alive, some not. The point is, I don't scare easy. That's why I never believed the stories about our bridge. Locals called it the Screaming Bridge. They said you could hear voices crying from the steel beams. Said people who jumped didn't always hit the water. Said something down there was collecting them. I always told people it was just wind through the metal. Metal expands and contracts, makes noise. Add some wind and imagination, and suddenly, you've got ghosts. I'd been working night shifts alone for years and never heard anything but normal bridge sounds. But November 1989 changed everything. It was almost winter. The water was low and cold. Ice was starting to form on the rocks. Most tourists stayed away this time of year, so traffic was light. Perfect time for maintenance work. That's how I met Danny Reeves. He was a bridge worker, about 30 years old, with a wife and 2 little kids. Nice guy. We'd talk sometimes when I made my rounds. He was part of the crew checking the steel cables and beams before winter hit hard. November 15th started normal. Cold wind, gray sky. I was getting ready for another quiet night shift when the call came in. "Mike, we got a problem," said Sheriff Blake over the radio. "Bridge worker fell. Need you to start a water search." I grabbed my gear and headed to the bridge. The work crew was standing around looking sick. Their faces were white as paper. "Where's Danny?" I asked the crew chief. He pointed down toward the river. We were working on the north side cables. Danny was hooked to a safety line. 1 second he was there, next second he was gone. Just gone. I looked over the edge. The river was 876 feet down. Even in the low water, that drop would kill anyone. But we had to look. That's the job. "Did you see him fall?" I asked. "That's the thing," said the crew chief. "We heard him scream, but when we looked, he wasn't falling. The safety line was just cut. Clean cut. And it was hanging way up in the steel beams, higher than any of us could reach." I looked up. Sure enough, Danny's safety harness was tangled in the bridge structure about 50 feet above where he'd been working. The rope looked like it had been sliced with a knife. But that was impossible. There was nobody up there who could have cut it. The crew packed up fast after that. They mumbled about coming back in spring. I didn't blame them. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. That night I started the search. Got my diving team together and went down to the river. The water was so cold it hurt to breathe. We had underwater lights and cameras. Standard rescue procedure. But nothing about this search felt standard. The water temperature kept changing. One spot would be normal cold, then suddenly you'd hit a patch that felt like ice. Our equipment kept acting up near certain sections of the bridge. Lights would flicker, radios would make strange sounds, and the cameras showed things that shouldn't be there. I've done hundreds of water searches. I know what a river bottom looks like. Rock, mud, maybe some fish, sometimes trash or old car parts. But what our cameras showed in the deep pools under the bridge wasn't normal. There were shapes down there, human shapes, too many of them. "Mike, you seeing this?" asked Tom, my dive partner. He was watching the monitor as I controlled the underwater camera. The camera showed at least a dozen bodies in the deepest part of the river. They were sitting on the bottom like they were waiting for something. But here's what made my skin crawl. They looked perfect. No decay, no fish bites. Like they had just sat down underwater and decided to stay. "How long have those been down there?" Tom whispered. I counted the bodies on the screen. Men, women, different ages. Some wore old clothes like from the 1930s. Others looked more recent. One was wearing a bridge worker's hard hat. "Could be Danny," I said, though something deep in my gut said it wasn't that simple. We marked the location and called for the state police dive team. This was bigger than a single missing person now. This was a mass recovery operation. The state boys showed up the next day with professional equipment and 5 experienced divers. I briefed them on what we'd found. Their team leader, a guy named Roberts, listened and nodded. "Probably a spot where the current dumps bodies," he said. "River's been here a long time. Bodies pile up in the deep holes." Made sense, except for one thing. None of those bodies should look that good after being underwater. Even a few days in river water changes a body. Some of what we saw looked like it had been down there for decades. Roberts and his team went down first. I stayed on the boat with the monitors and radio. Standard procedure. Someone always stays up top in case something goes wrong. Something went very wrong. Roberts had been down maybe 10 minutes when his voice came over the RS. Audio, all broken up with static. Something's grabbing my leg. I can't. There's hands. His safety line went tight. Then slack. Then tight again, like something was pulling on him. Roberts, come up now, I yelled into the radio. The line jerked hard 3 times, then went dead. His depth gauge showed him going down fast. Too fast. Deeper than he should go with his air supply. We pulled him up after 20 minutes. He was barely conscious and kept mumbling about hands grabbing him. Said there were more bodies down there than our cameras showed. Said they were moving. The other divers refused to go back down. Can't say I blamed them. That night, I went down alone. I know what you're thinking. Stupid move. But 15 years of water rescue teaches you to trust your training over your fear. And something about those bodies bothered me. They weren't random drowning victims. They were arranged, like someone had placed them there carefully. The water was colder than it should be in November. My lights worked fine until I got close to the bottom. Then they started flickering. The beam would catch something moving in the corner of my vision. But when I turned, nothing was there. I found the spot where Roberts had been attacked. There were marks in the river mud, handprints, lots of them, all different sizes. Some looked old, others looked fresh. Then I saw Danny. He was sitting with the others, wearing his hard hat and work clothes. His eyes were open. His mouth was moving like he was trying to talk, but no sound came out. Just bubbles. I swam closer, thinking maybe he was still alive somehow, trapped in an air pocket or something. But when I got within 10 feet of him, he looked right at me and shook his head, like he was warning me to stay back. That's when I felt the hands. Cold fingers wrapped around my ankle, then my wrist. I looked down and saw arms, reaching up from the river mud, pale arms attached to faces that looked peaceful but wrong. They weren't trying to hurt me exactly, more like they were trying to pull me down to join them. I kicked hard and shot toward the surface. My depth gauge said I came up way too fast, should have gotten the bends, but I felt fine. Better than fine, actually, like something had protected me on the way up. When I broke the surface, I could hear it for the first time. The bridge was screaming, not wind through metal, real screams, human voices calling for help. Some sounded recent, like Danny. Others sounded old, like they'd been screaming for decades. The sound echoed off the water and the canyon walls. I climbed into my boat and sat there shaking, not from cold, from understanding. The bridge wasn't just a place where people died. It was a place where something was collecting them, keeping them. And now it knew I knew. I should have reported what I saw and walked away. Let someone else deal with it. But Danny Reeves had a wife and 2 kids. They deserved to know what happened to their husband and father, even if the truth was impossible to believe. The next morning, I drove to the county library and started researching. I needed to know the history of our bridge and the river. What I found made everything worse. The New River Gorge Bridge was built between 1974 and 1977. During construction, 5 workers died. 3 fell into the gorge. 1 was crushed by steel beams. 1 just disappeared. They found his hard hat, but never found him. But the deaths went back further than that. Way further. Before the bridge, there was a railroad that crossed the gorge on a different bridge. Between 1920 and 1960, dozens of people died on or near that crossing. Train accidents, people falling, some who just vanished near the water. And before the railroad, before any bridges, the Cherokee had stories about the river. They called it a sacred place, said there was a spirit that guarded the water. According to the old stories, if you disturbed the spirit's home without proper respect, it would drag you down to its underwater realm and keep you forever. The construction of both bridges had disturbed a Cherokee burial ground on the north bank of the river. The bones had been moved to make room for the bridge foundations, but nobody had asked the Cherokee for permission. Nobody had performed the proper ceremonies. That night I went back to the bridge with a new plan. I brought Cherokee tobacco and sage that I'd bought from a native shop in town. I didn't know the right ceremonies, but I figured showing respect couldn't hurt. The bridge was screaming again before I even got to the water. Louder this time. I could pick out individual voices now. Danny's voice was one of them. I lowered my boat into the water and rowed to the deep pool where the bodies were. The screaming stopped. The river got so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "I know you're down there," I said to the water. "I know what happened. The construction, the burial ground, all of it. What do you want?" The water started to move. Not current, this was different. Like something huge was rising from the bottom. My boat rocked as waves spread out from the deep pool. Then I saw it. A massive shape under the water, bigger than any fish or animal. It moved like liquid shadow, flowing between the underwater rock formations. As it rose, the water around my boat got warmer. The thing was generating heat somehow. It surfaced 50 feet away from my boat. I've seen a lot of things in my life, but nothing prepared me for this. The Cherokee River spirit wasn't some gentle nature guardian. Decades of violent deaths and desecrated sacred ground had changed it into something else, something angry and hungry. It looked like a man made of water and shadow, but 30 feet tall. Its face kept changing. Sometimes it looked like Danny, sometimes like other faces I didn't recognize. Its eyes were deep pools of river water that reflected the bridge lights. When it spoke, its voice was like rushing water mixed with all the screams I'd been hearing. "You disturbed our rest," it said. "Your people built their monuments on our sacred places, spilled blood in our clean water. Now the water remembers. Now the water keeps what it takes." "The people you're keeping, they didn't know about the sacred ground," I said. "They were just doing their jobs." The spirit moved closer to my boat. This close, I could see that its body was full of faces. Dozens of them, all the people it had collected over the years. They were awake and aware, trapped inside the thing's watery form. "Their ignorance does not excuse the violation," the spirit said. "But you came seeking understanding. You brought gifts of respect. Why?" "Because taking innocent people won't fix what was broken," I said. "I want to make it right. Tell me how." The spirit studied me for a long moment. Then it smiled, and its smile was full of river stones instead of teeth. "Come below," it said. "See what your people's progress has cost. Then we will speak of making things right." Before I could answer, the spirit grabbed my boat and pulled it underwater. I should have drowned immediately, but somehow I could breathe. The spirit had created a pocket of air around me. We descended into the deep pool where I'd seen the bodies. Up close, it was worse than I'd imagined. There weren't just a dozen bodies. There were hundreds. They filled underwater caves and crevices throughout the river bottom. Some were recent, like Danny. Others were old, wearing clothes from the 1800s. All of them were perfectly preserved, sitting in neat rows like they were waiting for something. "This is what remains when sacred places are destroyed without acknowledgement," the spirit said. "Each death feeds the anger. Each soul trapped here adds to the hunger. Your bridge will stand, but the price will be paid in blood until the debt is settled." I saw Danny in the front row. He looked up at me and mouthed the word help. "What would settle? The debt?" I asked. The spirit's form rippled with thought. "Recognition, acknowledgement of what was lost. A memorial to honor both the dead and the sacred ground they rest in. Do this, and I will release the souls I have collected. Fail, and I will add you to their number." The spirit started pulling me deeper, toward a massive underwater cave. Inside, I could see even more bodies. These looked different, older, wearing Cherokee clothing, the original burial ground. "You have until the next full moon," the spirit said. 28 days. Convince your people to acknowledge what was done here. Build a proper memorial. Honor both the Cherokee dead and all who have died since. Do this, and the screaming will stop. Fail. It released my boat, and I shot back to the surface like a cork. When I broke through, I was gasping and shaking. The bridge was screaming again, louder than ever. I had 28 days to convince the government to build a memorial for a river spirit that was collecting souls. If I failed, Danny and hundreds of others would stay trapped forever, and I'd join them at the bottom of the river. 26 days later, I was running out of time and options. I'd tried everything, called the State Parks Department, contacted Cherokee tribal leaders, even reached out to historians and anthropologists. Everyone listened politely, then either hung up or suggested I take a vacation. The Parks Department said they couldn't build memorials based on local folklore. The state government said there was no budget for unnecessary historical markers. Even the Cherokee Tribal Council, while sympathetic, said they couldn't force the government to acknowledge sacred sites that had already been developed. Meanwhile, the bridge kept claiming victims. 3 more people had fallen in the past month. A tourist who got too close to the railing. A maintenance worker whose safety line mysteriously broke. A photographer who was taking pictures and just vanished. Each time I dove down and found them sitting with the others in their underwater prison. Each time, they looked at me with eyes full of hope that slowly faded when I surfaced alone. The full moon was tomorrow night. I was out of official options. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I'd been studying Cherokee water ceremonies for weeks. The tribal council couldn't help me officially, but an elderly Cherokee man named Joseph Crowfeather had been teaching me the old ways in private. He was a traditionalist who still practiced the ancient ceremonies his grandfather had taught him. The spirit isn't evil, he told me. It's wounded. Your people's machines and concrete cut it off from the sacred places that gave it peace. It's been drowning in anger and pain for decades. The only way to heal it is to give it what it needs, proper recognition and a way to let go of the rage. The ceremony was dangerous. I'd have to go underwater and perform the water blessing while surrounded by hundreds of trapped souls and an angry spirit that had already threatened to add me to its collection. But it was the only chance Danny and the others had. The night of the full moon, I put on my diving gear and loaded my boat with everything I'd need. Sacred tobacco, cedar sage, a piece of turquoise that Joseph had given me, and a small bag of soil from the original Cherokee burial ground, which I'd dug up from the construction record's location. The bridge was screaming so loud I could hear it from miles away. When I got to the water, the entire river was glowing with a pale green light. The spirit was waiting for me. It rose from the deep pool as soon as I reached the spot. This time, it looked different, angrier, more desperate. Its watery form was shot through with red streaks that looked like blood. "Your time is finished," it said. "You have failed to keep your promise." "I haven't failed," I said. "I found another way." I held up the bag of sacred soil. "This is earth for your original resting place, the burial ground that was disturbed. I want to perform a proper ceremony to honor the dead and heal the connection between the water and the sacred ground." The spirit moved closer, studying the soil. For a moment, its angry form seemed to flicker, and I saw something else underneath. A sad, tired presence that had been carrying pain for too long. "You would risk your life to honor our dead?" it asked. "I would risk my life to free the innocent people you've trapped," I said, "including my friend Danny. But I understand now that you're trapped too. This ceremony can free all of us." The spirit was quiet for a long moment. Then it nodded and pulled my boat underwater again. This time, we went deeper than before, down to the very bottom of the gorge where the original riverbed lay buried under decades of sediment. The spirit created an air pocket around me, but I could feel the enormous pressure of the water above. Hundreds of souls surrounded us in the underwater chamber. Danny was there, along with all the bridge workers, suicide jumpers, and accident victims from the past 50 years. Behind them sat the Cherokee dead, the original inhabitants of the sacred burial ground. "Perform your ceremony," the spirit said. "But know this, if you fail, if the ritual is rejected by the sacred powers, you will join them permanently." I opened the bag of sacred soil and let it flow into the water. Following Joseph's instructions, I began the Cherokee water blessing ceremony. It was all in Cherokee, words I'd practiced but didn't fully understand. The meaning didn't matter as much as the intention behind them. As I spoke, the water around us began to change. The angry red color faded, replaced by a clean, clear light. The spirit's form became less frightening, more human. I sprinkled tobacco on the water and held up the piece of turquoise. This was a most important part. Asking the spirit to release the souls it had been holding and accept the memorial soil as recognition of the sacred ground. The ceremony took an hour. When I finished, the spirit looked completely different. Instead of a towering monster made of shadow and rage, I saw a Cherokee man in traditional clothing. He was still made of water, but his face was peaceful now. "You have honored both the ancient dead and the recent victims," he said in a voice like flowing streams. "The sacred connection is restored. The souls can rest." He raised his hands, and all the trapped people began to glow with the same clean light that filled the water. One by one, they stood up and walked toward a tunnel of light that appeared in the cave wall. Danny stopped next to me before he left. He couldn't speak, but he put his hand on my shoulder and nodded. "Thanks," his eyes said. "Take care of my family." Then he was gone, along with all the others. The Cherokee spirit looked at me one last time. "The screaming will stop," he said. "I will return to the sacred places. But remember this, Ranger. Some wounds take generations to heal. Your people must do better in the future." He dissolved into the water, and I found myself floating toward the surface. The screaming stopped that night. For the first time in decades, the New River Gorge Bridge was silent, except for the normal sounds of wind and traffic. The next morning they found 28 bodies floating in the river. The media called it a mass surfacing event caused by unusual water conditions. The state coroner said the bodies showed signs of drowning from different time periods spanning 50 years, but couldn't explain why they were so well preserved. Danny Reeves was among them. I attended his funeral and told his wife he'd died trying to keep other workers safe. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. I kept one thing from that night, the piece of turquoise Joseph had given me. It still glows faintly in the dark, like it's holding a bit of that sacred water light. I carry it on every rescue mission now. The Parks Department never did build an official memorial, but I did something better. I worked with Joseph Crowfeather and other Cherokee elders to create a small, unofficial monument on the north bank of the river. It's just a simple stone circle with a plaque that reads, "In memory of all who found rest in these sacred waters." Most tourists walk right past it without reading the words, but sometimes I see people stop and stand quietly for a moment, like they can sense something important happened here. The river spirit kept its promise. The bridge doesn't scream anymore. People don't mysteriously fall or disappear. The new river flows clean and peaceful through the gorge, but I know it's still down there, watching, protecting the sacred places in its own way. Sometimes when I'm doing night patrols, I see a faint glow under the water near the memorial stone. And if I listen carefully, I can hear something that isn't quite the sound of flowing water. It sounds like whispered prayers in Cherokee, blessing the river and all who travel over it safely. I've been a ranger for 20 years now, 5 years since that November night. I've rescued dozens more people from the river, and every time I dive, I feel like something is helping guide me to them. The water itself seems to want to give up its victims now instead of keeping them. My advice? If you ever visit the New River Gorge Bridge, take a moment to stop at the stone circle on the north bank. Read the plaque. Maybe leave a bit of tobacco or sage if you have it. Not because you have to, but because some places deserve respect for what came before us. The Cherokee were right about sacred places. They're still sacred even after we build roads and bridges over them. The spirits that guard them don't disappear. They just wait, sometimes for decades, for someone to remember them properly. I learned that some wounds take generations to heal, but they can heal if we're willing to acknowledge what was lost and honor what remains. The new river runs peacefully now, but it remembers everything. And, sometimes, if you know how to listen, it still tells the stories of all the souls who found their way home through its sacred waters. The screaming has stopped, but the river still whispers. And I'm still listening. My name is David Ashworth, but everyone calls me Dave. For 18 years, I've been watching birds in the Ohio River Islands National Wildlife Refuge. I know every wing beat, every call, every migration pattern from here to the Gulf Coast. People think bird watching is boring, but when you really understand these creatures, they tell you everything about the world around us. I'm 43 now, been alone since Sarah died 3 years back. Cancer took her quick, but that's another story. These days, it's just me, my binoculars, and about 10,000 birds that depend on this stretch of river to survive their long journeys south. Point Pleasant, West Virginia sits right where the Kanawha meets the Ohio River. It's beautiful country if you can ignore the old TNT bunkers scattered through the woods. Back in World War II, they stored chemical weapons out here. Most folks forget about that now, but I never do. Sometimes the ground still smells funny after heavy rain. December 1966 was strange from the start. Should have been cold enough to freeze the river edges, but we were having the warmest December anyone could remember. The air felt thick, like before a big storm, but no storm ever came. The atmospheric pressure kept jumping around on my weather instruments. Birds don't like that kind of thing. Makes them nervous. I keep detailed logs of every species I spot. Cornell University trained me to do it right. Time of day, weather conditions, behavior patterns, everything. In 18 years, I've never missed a day of recording. My logbook is my Bible. That Tuesday morning in early December, I was checking my usual spots along the river when I noticed something odd. The red-winged blackbirds that roost in the cattails were gone. All of them. Just vanished overnight. Now redwings are tough birds. They stick around until the river starts to freeze. Finding their roost in 60-degree weather made no sense. I wrote it down anyway. Redwing colony abandoned overnight. No apparent cause. I figured maybe they sensed a weather change coming that my instruments missed. Birds know things we don't. But over the next few days, more species disappeared. First the starlings, then the crows, then even the tough old blue jays that usually stick around all winter. By Friday, walking through those woods felt like walking through a graveyard. No bird calls, no rustling in the trees, nothing but wind and the distant sound of trucks on Route 62. I'd spent my whole adult life in these woods, and I'd never heard them this quiet. Even in the deepest winter, you hear something, an owl, a woodpecker, a cardinal. But this silence felt wrong, like the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I started to worry. In all my years of study, I'd read about mass bird die-offs from disease or contamination. But this wasn't death. This was evacuation. Every single bird had simply left, like they knew something terrible was coming. I called my supervisor at the state wildlife office. "Frank," I said, "we've got a situation out here." Frank laughed. "Dave, you worry too much. Maybe they just found better food somewhere else." But Frank hadn't been in these woods. He hadn't felt that unnatural quiet pressing down like a weight. Something was coming. Something that made creatures with brains the size of walnuts smart enough to run. I should have run too. The weekend brought the first real evidence that something was seriously wrong. I was checking the old TNT storage area. We call it the TNT area, real original, when I found the tracks. Now, I've seen every kind of animal track in these woods. Deer, raccoon, turkey, even the occasional black bear wandering down from Pennsylvania. But these tracks were different. They looked like bird prints, but bigger than any bird that flies in North America. Each print was about 10 inches long, with 3 toes pointing forward and 1 pointing back. The depth told me whatever made them weighed a lot more than any bird should. The stride between prints was impossible, nearly 6 feet from track to track. I measured everything carefully, took photos with my old Polaroid camera. The tracks led from one abandoned bunker to another, then just stopped. Like whatever made them had simply taken off into the air. Back home, I pulled out my field guides and started comparing. The closest match was a sand hill crane, but even the biggest cranes only make 4-inch tracks. These were more than twice that size. Monday morning, I was back out with my measuring tape and camera when I heard my radio crackling. Not regular radio chatter, something else. A clicking pattern, almost like Morse code, but not quite right. I'd never heard interference like that before. "Base, this is Ranger Ashworth. Are you getting any unusual radio activity today?" Static answered me. Then more of that clicking. I tried switching channels, but it followed me across the dial. That's when I saw the feather. It was stuck in the bark of an old oak tree, about 8 feet off the ground. At first glance, it looked like a normal bird feather, maybe from a crow or raven. But when I climbed up to get it, I could see it was all wrong. The thing was nearly 2 feet long, bigger than any feather I'd ever seen. The color was strange, too. Not quite black, not quite brown, with an oily shimmer that seemed to move in the light. When I touched it, the texture felt more like metal than keratin. I wrapped it carefully in my handkerchief and drove straight to the State University lab in Huntington. Dr. Patricia Wells ran the biology department there. She'd helped me identify unusual specimens before. Bird bones, strange insects, that kind of thing. But when she put my feather under the microscope, her face went white. "Dave," she said slowly, "this doesn't match any bird species I know. The protein source and structure is, well, it's impossible. Are you sure you found this locally?" "Pulled it right off a tree this morning." She ran more tests, X-rays, chemical analysis, everything she could think of. The results made no sense. The feather contained minerals that shouldn't exist in any living creature. The microscopic structure looked more like synthetic fiber than anything biological. "I'm going to send this to a colleague at the Smithsonian," Dr. Wells said. "But Dave, where exactly did you find this?" I told her about the empty woods, the strange tracks, the radio interference. She listened without interrupting, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Have you been under any unusual stress lately?" she asked gently. That's when I knew she thought I was cracking up, losing my wife, spending too much time alone in the woods, maybe hallucinating things that weren't there. But I had the feather. I had the photographs. I had 18 years of credibility as a careful, methodical observer. I just didn't have any birds. Wednesday evening, I was filling out my daily log when the phone rang. It was Bill Henderson, who lived in a trailer near the TNT area. "Dave, you need to get out here," Bill said. His voice was shaking. "There's something in the woods, something big." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Bill's backyard with my flashlight, listening to the strangest story I'd ever heard. "It was perched on top of Bunker 7, Bill said. "Biggest damn bird I ever saw. Had to be 10 feet across when it spread its wings, but Dave, the eyes were red, glowing red, like taillights." Bill was a Vietnam vet, not the kind of man who spooked easily, but his hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette. When it saw me looking, it just stared back. For maybe 30 seconds, we just looked at each other. Then it spread those wings and took off without making a sound. No wing beat. No wind noise. Nothing. Just floated up into the sky like it weighed nothing at all. I spent an hour searching the area around Bunker 7 with my flashlight, found more of those impossible tracks and something else, scratches in the concrete wall of the bunker, deep gouges like claw marks, but arranged in patterns that almost looked deliberate. Driving home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness between the trees. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding wings. The radio in my truck started clicking again. By Thursday, word was getting around Point Pleasant about Bill Henderson's sighting. The local newspaper wanted to interview him, but Bill refused to talk. "They'll just make me sound crazy," he told me. But the sightings kept coming. Margaret Collins saw it flying over the Silver Bridge around midnight Tuesday. She described the same thing: enormous wings, red eyes, completely silent flight. Roger Scarberry and his wife Linda spotted it in the TNT area Wednesday night. It chased their car for nearly 2 miles, keeping pace at 60 miles per hour without ever flapping its wings. I started carrying a better camera. If this thing was real, I needed real evidence. Friday night, I decided to stake out Bunker 7. I parked my truck about 100 yards away and settled in with my camera and binoculars to wait. The woods were still dead quiet. No insects, no small mammals rustling in the leaves. Nothing. Just the distant hum of traffic on Route 62 and the sound of my own breathing. Around 11 o'clock, my radio started acting up again. That same clicking pattern, but louder now, more insistent. The interference was so bad, I had to turn it off. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a darker shadow against the dark sky. But as it got closer, I could make out the shape. Huge wings, much bigger than any bird, moving in slow, deliberate beats. It landed on top of Bunker 7 with complete silence. Through my binoculars, I got my first clear look at the thing people were calling mothman. It was about 7 feet tall, with wings that had to span 12 feet when fully extended. The body looked humanoid but wrong somehow. Too long, too thin. But the worst part was the eyes. 2 red circles that glowed like hot coals in the darkness. I fumbled for my camera, trying to get a shot without making noise. But the moment I raised it, those red eyes turned toward me. I felt something inside my head, like fingers poking around in my brain. Images started flashing behind my eyes. Not my memories, but something else's. I saw the silver bridge packed with evening traffic. I saw cables snapping, steel twisting, cars falling into the icy river. I saw people screaming, drowning, dying. Then I saw a date, December 15th, 1967. The vision lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. When it ended, the creature was gone, vanished without a trace, like it had never been there at all. I sat in my truck for another hour, shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The visions felt more real than reality. I could still hear the sound of twisting metal, still see those cars disappearing under the black water. Saturday morning, I drove into town and found Sheriff Milliken at the diner. "Sheriff," I said, "I need to talk to you about the Silver Bridge." He looked up from his coffee. "What about it?" "I think it's going to collapse. Next December the 15th. I think a lot of people are going to die." Sheriff Milliken studied my face for a long moment. "Dave, you been getting enough sleep lately? This mothman business has everyone on edge." How could I explain what I'd seen? How could I tell him that a 10-foot-tall creature with glowing red eyes had shown me the future? He'd have me committed. "Just maybe get someone to inspect the bridge," I said. "Check the cables, the supports, please." He promised he would, but I could see he was just humoring me. That afternoon, I went back to Bunker 7. In daylight, I could see more claw marks on the concrete, and something else, burn marks, like the creature gave off some kind of heat or energy. I was taking photographs when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to find Dr. Patricia Wells walking through the trees. "I got the results back from the Smithsonian," she said. "Your feather doesn't match anything in their database. The mineral composition includes elements that shouldn't exist in any living creature on Earth." She paused, looking around at the silent woods. "Dave, I think you should know. 3 other wildlife refuges in the region are reporting the same phenomenon. Complete bird evacuation, no apparent cause. Something is happening here, something we don't understand." That night, I dreamed about the bridge. I saw it from underneath this time, could see the stress fractures spreading through the steel like cracks in ice. In the dream, I was trying to warn people, but no one could hear me. My voice made no sound. I woke up knowing that the creature hadn't just shown me one possible future. It had shown me what was definitely going to happen, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sunday morning, December 11th, 1966, I was back in the TNT area before sunrise. Something told me the creature would return, and I was right. It was waiting for me on Bunker 7, those red eyes glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. This time, I didn't try to hide. I walked straight toward it, camera hanging around my neck, hands visible and empty. "I know you can understand me," I said aloud. "I know you're trying to warn us about something." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Up close, I could see that its skin looked more like dark fabric than flesh. The wings weren't feathered at all. They looked like stretched leather, but with a metallic sheen. Then it spoke to me, not with words, but directly into my mind. The bridge fails in 4 days. 46 die. You must warn them. Images flooded my brain again. This time I saw the bridge from every angle, the corroded cables, the street, points, the exact moment when everything would give way. Rush hour traffic, families coming home from work, children in the back seats. Why me? I thought back at it. You watch, you record, you understand patterns. The others will not listen. Why don't you warn them yourself? The creature's head turned toward town, and I felt its sadness like a physical weight. They fear me. My presence brings panic. You are trusted. It spread those massive wings, preparing to take off. 4 days, it repeated in my mind. Remember. Then it was gone, lifting silently into the sky until it disappeared against the stars. I spent the rest of Sunday driving around Point Pleasant, trying to figure out how to warn people without sounding insane. How do you tell a town that their most important bridge is going to collapse because a 10-foot monster told you so? Monday morning, I went to see the mayor. Mr. Patterson, I said, I have reason to believe the Silver Bridge is structurally unsound. We need to close it for inspection immediately. Mayor Patterson looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Dave, that bridge carries 10,000 cars a day. We can't just shut it down based on a feeling. It's not a feeling, it's professional observation. You're a bird watcher, not an engineer. I tried the state highway department, same response. I tried the local newspaper. They wanted to write a story about the crazy ranger who believed in Mothman, but they wouldn't print anything about bridge safety without official confirmation. Tuesday morning, I positioned myself at the Point Pleasant end of the Silver Bridge and started trying to warn people directly. Excuse me, I'd say to drivers stopped at the traffic light. You might want to use the other bridge for a few days. Most people ignored me. A few asked why, and when I couldn't give them a reason that made sense, they drove. Eon anyway. By Wednesday, I was desperate. I called every contact I had, other rangers, wildlife officials, anyone who might have influence. Nobody would listen to warnings based on visions from a supernatural creature. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those people who would be on the bridge tomorrow evening. Commuters heading home from work. Maybe families going Christmas shopping in Ohio. Kids who would never see Christmas. Thursday, December 15th, dawned cold and clear. The warm weather had finally broken, and ice was forming along the riverbanks. I spent the day at the bridge, still trying to warn people, still getting ignored. Around 5:30 in the evening, rush hour traffic started building up. Cars backed up on both sides of the river, everyone trying to get home for dinner. I was standing on the West Virginia side when I felt it, that same mental touch I'd experienced with the creature. But this time it wasn't communication. It was pure warning, like an air raid siren going off inside my skull. I looked up and saw the Mothman perched on the bridge's north tower, wings spread wide, red eyes blazing. Now, it said in my mind. That's when I heard the first cable snap. It sounded like a gunshot echoing across the water. Then another. Cars on the bridge started sliding as the deck tilted. People were getting out of their vehicles, running, screaming. But there was nowhere to run. The entire center span dropped into the Ohio River in less than a minute. 37 vehicles went down with it. The water was so cold and the current so strong that most of the victims never had a chance. I stood there watching it happen, helpless, knowing I'd tried and failed to prevent it. The final death count was 46 people, exactly as the Mothman had predicted. That was over 50 years ago, but I remember every detail like it happened yesterday. The investigation blamed metal fatigue in one of the eye-bar chains. They said the bridge had been failing for years, little by little, until that final moment when everything gave wow. At once. They never found any evidence of supernatural intervention. The official report made no mention of unusual bird behavior or strange creatures. As far as the government was concerned, it was just a tragic accident. But I knew better. After the bridge collapse, the Mothman sightings stopped. The creature had done what it came to do. It had tried to warn us. The fact that we didn't listen wasn't its fault. The birds came back gradually over the next few months. First the hardy species like crows and starlings, then the more sensitive ones. By spring, the woods sounded normal again. I kept that impossible feather in my desk drawer for years until it finally crumbled to dust. Dr. Wells never did get an explanation from the Smithsonian. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. I retired from the Wildlife Service in 1985, but I still live near Point Pleasant. I still watch the skies, especially during times of change or stress in the community, because the mothman came back. Not often, and not for long, but I've seen it 3 more times over the years. Once in 1978, just before the chemical plant explosion that killed 2 workers. Once in 1999, a week before the tornado that tore through downtown. And most recently in 2007, right before the mine collapse up in Mason County. Each time, I tried to warn people. Each time, most folks ignored me. But a few listened, and a few lives were saved. That's something, I guess. People ask me sometimes if I'm afraid of the mothman. The truth is, I'm grateful to it. Not everyone gets a warning before disaster strikes. Most of us just go about our daily lives, never knowing when everything might change in an instant. But some of us are chosen to be watchers, to stand guard against the darkness. The mothman showed me that much. I'm 73 now, too old for long hikes through the TNT area, but I still check the newspaper. Heirs from other states looking for reports of mass bird migrations or unusual animal behavior. Because the mothman isn't just Point Pleasant's guardian, it's out there somewhere, trying to save whoever will listen. The trick is learning to recognize the warnings when they come. If you ever find yourself in a place where all the birds have suddenly gone quiet, pay attention. If you see red eyes glowing in the darkness, don't run away. Listen to what they're trying to tell you. Your life might depend on it. And remember, just because something is impossible doesn't mean it isn't real. I learned that lesson on a cold December night in 1966, and I've never forgotten it. The mothman is still out there, still watching, still warning. The question is, when it comes for you, will you listen?